Semen retention drags you into a room you've spent years avoiding, locks the door, and throws away the key. It stops caring about your excuses, your distractions, your fake bravado, and leaves you with one thing you've always run from. Whatever you buried. You want a magic trick, but what you actually get is a mirror so sharp it cuts you every time you blink. This practice doesn't make you stronger the way motivational posters promise. It makes you uncomfortable in ways you've postponed for years. Every moment you pretended didn't hurt comes crawling back, not because the universe hates you, but because you finally removed the noise you used to drown yourself in. When you stop pumping yourself full of instant gratification, you remove the anesthesia, and suddenly your mind, your past, your unresolved nonsense, everything wakes up. The first thing you notice is the silence. You've been terrified of silence your whole life, whether you admit it or not. Silence is where the memories hide. Silence is where your own voice actually becomes audible. And that scares the hell out of you because you know that voice is complaints. You know it has accusations. You know it remembers the things you tried to label as not a big deal. Semen retention forces you to sit in that silence without running to the usual escape hatch, because the escape hatch is exactly what you closed. You cut off the little trick they used to numb the uncomfortable inner chatter. Now the chatter turns into a roar, and you finally realize how loud your inner life has always been. It's not getting louder. You've just stopped smothering it. You start noticing fractures in yourself that you pretended weren't there. The moments you brushed off, the disappointments you shrugged away, the betrayals you laughed about, the things you told yourself to get over because you thought you didn't have time to feel them. They line up like ghosts, demanding their share of attention. Not because you're weak, but because you finally stopped scattering your emotional bandwidth across 1,000 cheap stimulations. There's no buffer anymore. Semen retention takes away the fog you used to hide behind, the blur you called coping, and what's left is raw clarity. And clarity is uncomfortable. Clarity exposes the version of you who never fully grew up, because he kept pausing his discomfort instead of confronting it. You start remembering things you didn't ask to remember, not because semen retention is mystical, but because it flushes out your ability to suppress. Those small humiliations you brushed off, they surface. The arguments where you pretended you didn't care, they rise up. All the times someone treated you in a way that cut deeper than you admitted, they return for repayment. People think the difficulty of semen retention is about desire. That's surface-level nonsense. The real battle isn't with your body. It's with the unresolved parts of yourself that you've avoided processing for years. When you reduce your cheap coping habits, your mind has no choice but to show you the backlog. This is why so many people quit. Not because they can't handle desire, but because they can't handle themselves. They think they're fighting urges. They're actually fighting their own suppressed emotional history. They think it's about discipline. It's about exposure. They think they're pushing through temptation. But what actually breaks them is the sudden confrontation with memories they padded with distraction. Retention doesn't make you mighty. It makes you honest. And people fear honesty more than anything. You begin noticing patterns in your behavior that you've always dismissed as random. You see why you chase validation. You see how you've mistaken attention for connection. You see how you've used stimulation to avoid sitting with emptiness. You see the ways you've sabotaged yourself because you refuse to feel pain at the moment it happened. Pain doesn't disappear just because you decide you're done with it. It sits. It accumulates. It matures. Like rotten fruit. And the moment you stop feeding your brain artificial comfort, that old pain realizes the gate is open and marshes right in. Semen retention doesn't fix you. It exposes you. The parts of you that you hid so well that even you forgot their shapes. It forces you to take responsibility for the emotional mess you created by refusing to process discomfort in real time. You start to see how often you've lied to yourself just to avoid confronting what hurt. You see the relationships you tolerated, the humiliations you accepted, the compromises that twisted you in ways you pretended were noble. You see how much of your identity was constructed around avoiding vulnerability instead of dealing with it. There's a brutal moment that hits everyone who really commits to retention. It arrives without warning. One day, you're sitting quietly, minding your business, and a memory slams into you so hard your breath stutters. A moment you brushed off years ago. Something you pretended didn't matter. Suddenly you feel it the way you should have felt it back then, but raw, unfiltered, and amplified by years of neglect. It's uncomfortable. It's humiliating. It's infuriating, but it's also necessary. Emotional debt always comes due, and retention is one of the few practices that stops you from taking new loans and forces you to confront what you already owe. You begin understanding why you've repeated the same mistakes in different forms, why similar situations keep showing up in your life, why your reactions follow patterns you swear you didn't choose, because you never resolved the origin points. You never rewired the emotional reflex. You slapped distractions over the wound until you convinced yourself the wound healed. It didn't. You just numbed it. Retention removes the numbness, and suddenly you feel the wound you thought you outgrew. It's humbling. It's infuriating. And it's exactly the confrontation you needed. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Facing those moments is the real reason semen retention transforms people. Not because of some mystical virtue or imaginary superpower, but because you finally stop running from yourself. You stop outsourcing your emotional regulation to quick fixes. You stop allowing your mind to hide behind physical release. When the numbing mechanism is removed, your mind has to reorganize itself. You finally sit with discomfort long enough for it to teach you something instead of just scaring you away. People like to romanticize healing. They talk about it like it's warm tea and soft blankets. Healing is violence against everything inside you that shouldn't remain. Healing is demolition. Retention puts a sledgehammer in your hand and points at the structures you built out of avoidance. The only reason it feels painful is because you're finally dismantling the lies you used to survive. Lies eventually suffocate you. Retention removes your ability to keep pretending they're oxygen. Your mind becomes sharper not because of some mythical energy boosts, but because you stop suppressing. Suppression is exhausting. Avoidance drains more strength than confrontation ever will. Every unresolved moment you carry is like a background process, eating your memory and slowing your system. When retention forces those processes into the foreground, you can finally close them. Not by ignoring them, but by finally feeling what you refuse to feel. There's a moment, weeks into the practice, when you begin to understand yourself with embarrassing clarity. You see exactly why you reacted to past situations the way you did. You realize how much fear dictated your behavior even when you pretended you were being confident or detached. You see your own cowardice in high definition. It's rude. It's uncomfortable. But it is the beginning of actual maturity. You can't grow from a lie. You can only grow when you finally accept what's been true all along. Retention makes you face the moments you pretended didn't hurt because it strips away your ability to distract yourself from the truth. And humans will do anything to avoid truth. The irony is that every strength you admire in others, presence, decisiveness, discipline, steadiness, comes from the exact discomfort you're trying to avoid. They didn't gain those through perfection. They gained them by confronting the moments you pretend don't exist. Retention is not enlightenment. It is excavation. It digs through your psyche with no regard for your comfort. It tears down your illusions without asking permission. It holds you accountable for the emotional shortcuts you took. And if you actually stick with it long enough, you begin to rebuild from a place that isn't fragile. You stop being threatened by silence. You stop being manipulated by your impulses. You stop being controlled by wounds you refuse to acknowledge. You become someone who can actually feel pain without collapsing. Because you finally learned how to feel, instead of running from the feeling. The reason this practice rattles you is simple. You've conditioned yourself to fear your own mind. You've used pleasure as a shield. When the shield drops, you discover that your mind isn't your enemy. It's a neglected animal that's been abandoned for years. It claws at you because it wants attention, not because it wants to destroy you. The discomfort you feel isn't punishment. It's communication. Once you learn to listen without panicking, something incredible happens. Not magical, but deeply logical. Those old moments begin to dissolve, not because you force them away, but because you finally process them. Pain that's felt fully doesn't linger. Pain that's avoided becomes permanent. Retention forces you to choose the temporary discomfort you've been avoiding over the lifelong discomfort you've been tolerating. That's why the practice is confronting. That's why it breaks men who approach it with fantasies instead of honesty. They expect power. They meet themselves. They expect strength. They meet their neglected weaknesses. They expect transformation. They meet accountability. And accountability is a thing most people run from their entire lives. Semen retention makes you face the moments you pretended didn't hurt, because those moments are the roots of every self-sabotage, every insecurity, every pattern you swear you're trying to fix. You cannot outrun what you refuse to feel. You can only delay it. Retention removes the delay. It gives you your discomfort straight, without sugar, without escape routes. And once you walk through it, truly walk through it, you finally stop living as a man who dodges his own past. You stop being someone who crumbles under emotional weight he never learned to lift. You stop being controlled by memories you never processed. You become someone who can stand in his own silence without feeling threatened. A man who no longer fears the truth has already surpassed the version of himself who relied on escape. The road forward is the same road inward.